That is a priceless picture, isn't it? And next, we have a reading from Casey Masterpietro. It's very loud.
Sorry, I'm gonna do my best, I swear. This is a poem that I think my mom found. Oh, from Ron? Sorry, wasn't sure. God saw him getting tired, and a cure was not to be. So he put his arms around him and whispered, "Come to me." With tearful eyes, he watched him suffer and saw him slowly fade away. Although we loved him dearly, we could not make him stay. A golden heart stopped beating, hard-working hands put to rest. God broke our hearts to prove to us he only takes the best. Yeah, sorry. I love you, Grandpa.
Allow me, if you will, to begin my comments with a writing by George's beloved wife, Janice. I suppose to Janice this may have been just a bit of family news, but for our listening today, it is a reminder of the way that George lived his life. I'm told that George's approach to life was somewhat reminiscent of John Wayne. It's called Hands with Purpose. My husband is Swedish, tall, broad, and big-boned. His hands are proportionate to his large frame, but yet have always drawn so much attention from friends and family because of how big they are. As a boy, he used those hands to pick potatoes, tend to the animals, and work on the machines on the farm where he grew up. As a youth, he used those same rugged working hands to hold mine at our wedding. While he was in the military, he used them to salute our flag and serve his country. When we were blessed with 4 children, his hands gently held every one of them. His hands have always worked hard, and it showed. He was a heavy equipment operator for 50 years, always visible with calluses, bruises, scrapes, and the occasional injured fingernail. As one can imagine, he always had a hard time finding gloves that were big enough. Even when it was bitterly cold outside at work, he would sometimes discard his gloves because they didn't fit. But he never seemed to be bothered by the cold and never allowed it to get him down. Our daughter Sue wrote an essay for her dad's 75th birthday. She said she remembered when she was very small and his hands were too big for her to hold, that he would put out just a pinky, as Sue has told us, and she could walk beside him. She also remembered a time when she was young and while running fell face first into a pile of sand. The sand was ground into her face, and the doctor said it would quickly scab over. Every day the scab would have to be taken off and medicine applied. It was so painful, but she would only let George clean it. She cried while he was doing it, but she was brave.
So did he.
I'm holding it back right now. She cried while he was doing it, but she was brave and knew it had to be done. His hands were tough when they had to be, and gentle when it was needed. Even our grandchildren remember when they would get a sliver of glass or wood, and they would only let my husband remove it because he would make a big production out of the process. He would tease them that it would be a very big operation, and he was going to get it out with his big hunting knife and a tiny pair of tweezers.
That's life.
That is life. So out of those tiny feeder hands, with his big hands, and a seemingly even bigger hunting knife. All the teasing and drama made it easy for the kids to keep their minds off the sliver, and he always got the sliver out. Our friends always noticed my husband's hands too. On New Year's Eve, we were at a friend's, Dale's, house for a party. Dale had planned to have a relay race game. And there were two lines. One was given a bag full of strips of cut-up newspaper, a pair of old work gloves, and a stick wrapped in gum. A stick of wrapped gum, I'm sorry. Each person in the line was to put on the gloves, find the gum in the bag of paper strips, and unwrap the gum. Then they were to run to the end of the room and back, and then hand the gloves to the next person in line. Well, needless to say, the work gloves didn't fit my husband's hands, and Dale never got over that. She always told everyone how he tried to fit George with work gloves and couldn't. We think we can tell so much about a person based on the appearance of their hands, but hands with a purpose, like my husband's, have so much more of a story to tell. I read that only because I've come to believe in what I've read here, that your mother was a far better writer than I. So using her words seemed most appropriate. That is life, isn't it? Many of you here today may have seen George as your best friend. It was a pretty easy thing to do for a man of such character and worth. He always looked you in the eye during a conversation. You always knew where you stood with George because, well, he never really pulled punches. He said it like he saw it. Seems to me he probably didn't have a filter. But we always knew where we stood. But George was even-tempered, always fair, especially when it came to raising children. He was slow to anger and very, very quick to forgive. I have another reading from Janice called Away from It All. Sort of a newsletter, but I think it's important to our purpose here today. I don't know what year this was written. Do you? My husband George came home from a long, hard day's work and told me Mr. Leitner, his supervisor, was selling his vacation cottage, which was on a lake in the Adirondack Mountains in New York. George said we could go to take a look at it on the weekend if I and our two younger boys were interested. The two older children were already out of the house and working on their careers. The boys still living at home were ages 16 and 10, and they were really excited about going to see this place. It was a 4-hour drive. The lake was called Stoner Lake. When we arrived there, Mr. Leitner was already there for us. The boys were so excited by what they saw. The snow was so deep, they had never seen it like that in Connecticut. It was November, and the cottage was right in the snow belt part of the state. They had just had their first big snow for the first time that year, and it set a record. Back home in Connecticut, we all had snowmobiles that the boys used in riding, so that they got really excited seeing all the groomed trails that seemed to go on endlessly for miles. On the lake, between the cottages, and through the thick woods. The scenery there was breathtaking. There were huge pine trees loaded with a heavy layer of snow, and the frozen lake was surrounded by snow-capped mountains. The air was crisp and clear, and when you closed your eyes, you heard a beautiful silence. This was God's country. We went inside to the cottage to look around. It was decorated with 30s period furniture, full of antiques. I loved it. There was a little hand pump for water attached to the kitchen sink, which was connected to a hand-dug well in the yard. The water that flowed from that pump was clear as liquid ice. They also had hot and cold running water, which was a necessity for us. Since everything seemed satisfactory, we then waited to hear the price. Mr. Leitner started with a price that was 3 times higher than we were prepared to pay. We figured in all the repairs, and we thought we would have to make, and thought about what we would have to make, and George made an offer of 1/3 of what the asking price was. Mr. Leitner called and told us he would accept George's price. We had saved enough for a down payment, and the owner of the company that George worked for told him he would lend him the rest at very minimal interest. He would deduct the payments each week from George's paycheck, so he would have it paid off within 5 years. That spring, we opened the cottage. A bunch of our friends came to help us. We laid new rugs, painted walls, repaired, cleaned, and made curtains. George fixed the plumbing and things on the outside, like building a porch and a dock out into the lake, using lumber right there from the woods. We all worked so hard, but we enjoyed watching the place come to life, so it didn't really feel like work. We finished and had a big feast. Lobster, spaghetti, and the best desserts. After going up to our cottage each weekend for a while, I got to know the other woman who also had cottages on the lake. You know, when I first read that sentence, I didn't know where your mom was going with that.
That's life.
That's life, yeah. But let me return. The other woman who had cottages on the lake, and we had a nice group of friends there. We would go shopping in the small neighboring towns. They had some nice consignment and junk shops that my friends and I loved to browse through. On many holidays, Labor Day, 4th of July, and so on, friends from Connecticut came up, and we had big gatherings of food and family and friends and fun at our cottage. We ate steak, lobster, fresh clams, steamers. I always made a different rich dessert. At everyone's request, I also made popovers from homemade raspberry jam to go with them for breakfast. It was amazing how big your appetite gets in a setting like this. We owned our cottage for 22 years. We had so many good times with our friends and family, I couldn't possibly list them all. It was the perfect weekend getaway and just what we needed at that time in our lives. Some years later, when George retired, we were invited to go with my friend Mary Lou to Florida with her. She was widowed and she needed to go to Tarpon Springs to clean out and sell her mom's home after she had recently passed away. We agreed to help her out, and while we were there, she bought a manufactured home for herself and asked us, would we like to spend our winters with her there? We always got along well, and we loved this part of Florida, so we figured this was an offer we couldn't refuse. We spent about 5 winters with her there when we decided that we would like a place of our own, one that our children could visit as well. By this time, we had sold our New York cottage as it was getting too much work for us to keep up. So we focused on Florida and rented a place not far from Tarpon Springs in a place called Newport Richey during the winter months. We invited our kids who came and had a wonderful time. Our place had a beautiful pool, friendly neighbors, and days filled with activities. Seeing that 2 of our children became handicapped after this, we felt that we were lucky to have enjoyed Florida with them at that time. We've been spending our winters in Newport Richey, Florida for 12 years now. And although we didn't go this year, instead, we planned on traveling to Arizona to visit with Jeff. We're just as happy not to be going to Florida this winter. Maybe at this time of our lives, we welcome this kind of peace away from it all in our own home. For now, anyway. And yes, that is life.